Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. These are interesting times in Africa, signaling what could mean the end of an era for the world's oldest president who's gone from freedom fighter to sit-tight dictator in the last 37 years. Political intrigues and drama continue to play out in Zimbabwe as latest episodes in the country features a subtle military coup of the crocodile and of the comeback of the crocodile and the possibility of Christmas in November if Robert Mugabe decides to step down as advised. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the political developments in Zimbabwe with President Mugabe refusing to step down amidst political pressure? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
The colonial history of Zimbabwe, formerly known as Southern Rhodesia, dates back to 1890, when the British, following Cecil John Rhodes and his South African company, went there in search of gold. A long period of apartheid ensued, and a bitter fight went on in search of freedom for the black people of the then Rhodesia. Fast forward, Mugabe helped the country gain independence in 1980 after a long colonial rule. A general election was held, and the political party that he founded, ZANU-PF Party, won the election. Robert Mugabe became the prime minister, a position in which the real power in the country was vested. He has been in power ever since. Despite all the tales of war in the country, Mugabe has been able to hold on to power for 37 years. The current crisis appears to be the result of a political shakeup earlier this month, but the problems go much deeper. Earlier in November, Mugabe fired his vice president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, and that seemed to have split his ZANU-PF party. Even the army was at odds with this move. They support Mnangagwa and has seen him as Mugabe's potential successor, maybe if Mugabe died in office. But the fight for a successor became heated, and the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, was caught in the fray with Mnangagwa. It had appeared she won the battle against her rival as she positioned herself as a top candidate for the presidency once her husband dies. After Mnangagwa was ousted, there was a purge of his allies from government. This might have forced the military to embark on the action to wrest power from the almost century-old leader. It is unclear what would happen next. The military's plans and intention are not yet known. Vice President Mnangagwa, who had earlier fled to South Africa, and opposition leader Sangirai are both back in the country. But the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, is rumored to be out of the country. That has been denied, but she hasn't been seen since the coup the military maintains is not a coup.
We wish to make it abundantly clear that this is not a military takeover of government.
Welcome back. President Mugabe remains a household name and the only president Zimbabweans had ever known since the end of white minority rule in 1980 and the revision of the constitution in 1987. The 93-year-old leader refused to resign as expected on a live state broadcast after he was expelled from ruling ZANU-PF with an option of impeachment if he failed to meet the Monday deadline to step down. Joining me in the studio on Africa Today, I have Clem Baye, a media consultant and political analyst. And on Skype, I have David Coltart, lawyer, founding member of the Movement for Democratic Change and a former minister under President Mugabe. Good to have you gentlemen on the program.
Good evening.
Yes, let me begin with you now, Clem. Let's look at the snowball of events that, took us to where we are now in Zimbabwe. We first of all had the sack of Mnangagwa, and then the military takeover, although it says it is not a takeover. And now we have the point where Mugabe is likely to be taken out of office, through constitutional means. That's impeachment. Before then and now, did you see any of this coming in Zimbabwe?
I would not say that I saw it coming, but I knew that things would get to a head sooner rather than later. But I couldn't have seen this because the reason is that really these people, they were all dining together. They were all supping together, but somebody overplayed his hand, namely President Robert Mugabe. And because he was so beholden to his wife, and she was very ambitious, and first they had made sure that they had cleared the road with the ouster of Joyce Mujuru about 2 years ago or something like that. And now you have Emerson Mnangagwa. But remember that Mnangagwa has been one of Mugabe's closest allies. They know each other's deep secrets. He was in charge of state security for many years. And so they are all together in a sense. And I think that overplaying her hand or her husband not being able to restrain her was like, you know, the last straw, and something had to give, because after that she might now say, let's move against the military, let's move against these people, and they wouldn't be able to stand that. That is my thinking.
Interesting there. David, from what Clem has just said, would you say that all these happenings in Zimbabwe is clearly the undoing of Mugabe?
There's no doubt that this is the Mugabe's political career. When you lose the support of the military, of the general public, and of your own party, there's no way out. But that is especially the case when you age 93. He turns 94 in February, and this very definitely marks the end of his political career. And it's only now a question of when he goes and how he goes, not if he goes.
Yeah, that's the question people are asking now. When will he go? Because he just had a broadcast yesterday, and it clearly showed that he isn't ready to resign. So, but the impeachment process already kick-started by the ruling party, that's the ZANU-PF. How long will it take before they can get him out of office, do you think?
It's not clear how long it's going to take. The constitutional provision sets out a three-phase process. The first phase is Parliament, by a simple majority, has to pass a petition to investigate his impeachment. The second stage in the process is a select committee of Parliament is set up to investigate the matter. And the third stage is, if that select committee recommends his impeachment, that then goes back to both houses of Parliament, both the Senate and the lower house, for a two-thirds, and a two-thirds majority is required to pass the impeachment motion. Now, as I say, the Constitution does not set out a time frame, and because of that, in theory at least, it is possible for this to perhaps be done in as quick a period as a couple of days. We're told that ZANU-PF is going to present the motion in Parliament tomorrow, and the committee will then be set up. They can't rush it through, I don't think, in an afternoon. That would be doing things with unseemly haste, because at the very least, they've got to pretend to investigate the matter. There's another body of opinion that says that part of that investigation should allow Robert Mugabe to hear the charges leveled against him and to respond to those. So that might take a day or so to get him into Parliament to respond. And then it goes back to Parliament once that recommendation has been made. But if you look at the energy in the country on Saturday, hundreds of thousands of people turned out calling for Mugabe to go. And if you look at the unseemly haste in which his own party moved just yesterday to throw him out of his position in the party, it seems to me that there's no desire within his own party, never mind the opposition, to delay this process. And as I say, there's no bar in the Constitution to allowing this to happen rapidly.
All right, now let me quickly come to you now, Clem. From what he's just said now, the people are ready to take Mugabe out of out of leadership of the country. But one will begin to ask, why did it take them this long to know that this is what they ought to have done, you know, how many years ago? Because take for instance now, if perhaps the army hadn't, you know, come into, you know, the presidential palace and done what it had done, perhaps the country would still hold on to Mugabe as the next country's leader.
Might have even been worse. I think that we should remember that historically, Mugabe, I don't know whether to say, used to be a very popular leader. I was there in 1980 during the elections. I covered the elections for my newspaper in the, Rhodesia as it was called, and he was very popular generally. And even when he came to power, he had a very good finance minister, Bernard Chizero. I've not heard about the man again. But what I'm saying is that he actually did take steps. Education was going very well. They had one of the best education system in Africa. Agric was good, particularly good with the small landholders. But immediately he started playing the politics of survival. He took his eyes off the ball. This is my assessment. He took his eyes off the ball and was thinking more about survival. And then he went into all these policies that has ruined the Zimbabwean economy. So there is an affection for him that, oh, this is the father of the nation. He was a good person. But then he also had the negative side. He can be very brutal, but don't take anything away from him. The man is a very clever man. And he's shown by the way he behaved. Even yesterday, we were all glued to the TV set, waiting to hear him say, as a result of all this, I've resigned. He speaks very good English. His English is impeccable. His thought process still good, but he was looking a bit doddery yesterday. But maybe he's exhausted from the stress of everything. So he had those good qualities. And there is a problem. The Zimbabwean military, in my view, and my co-contributor can maybe, I would want to defer to him. He's based there. He knows a lot. I haven't been to Zimbabwe for years. But what I do know is that they do not want in SADC region and in the African Union generally to be seen that we've staged a coup. So it's
why is that?
Well, the reason is that it's going to create constitutional problems, and it's going to create problems of recognition, because in SADC, they really do not want it that somebody staged a coup. And it's all part of the process, along with the fact that they want to give him a decent exit. But in my view, he's acting like somebody who was on the Titanic and he's talking about protocol and procedures. A sinking Titanic, at that point, you should be thinking of rescue.
Jumping.
Yeah, and jumping.
Jumping.
Yeah.
All right, let's quickly go on a short break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at the political developments in Zimbabwe, with President Mugabe refusing to step down despite intense political pressure. Zimbabwe's ruling party has ordered impeachment proceedings to begin against long-time President Robert Mugabe, and he could be voted out within 2 days. While Emmerson Mnangagwa waits on time to fill in the void, opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai is doubtful on the ability of the ruling party to solve the country's challenges. Now, David Coltart, I believe you're still online. What are your thoughts so far on how the ZANU-PF intends to hold on the situation in terms of, well, relieving Mugabe of his duties and possibly impeaching him come Tuesday?
I think that the ZANU-PF plan is to impeach Robert Mugabe so that they benefit from a constitutional provision which will allow Emmerson Mnangagwa effectively to take over the presidency of the country for the remainder of Robert Mugabe's term of office. Robert Mugabe was elected in July 2013 for a 5-year term, which ends on the 22nd of August next year. And so their plan of action is to impeach him allow Emmerson Mnangagwa to take over. He will take over ZANU-PF and government lock, stock and barrel. He'll have all the powers that Robert Mugabe had, and he will then be able to appoint his own cabinet and govern the country with the support of the military through to that election. Now, there's some conflicting stories coming out of ZANU-PF. Patrick Chinamasa, who's very close to Mnangagwa, said yesterday that ZANU-PF had no intention of entering into a further government of national unity, similar to the one I participated in between 2009 and 2013. And from that, it appears that they are prepared to go it alone.
So, but do you think the ZANU-PF really has what it takes to steer the country in the right course, looking at concerns raised here by the opposition?
Well, one of the points that we've made is that we find it ironic that the generals who assisted Robert Mugabe get into power in 2008 and once again in 2013, he would never have been elected in 2008 and 2013 without the assistance of Emmerson Mnangagwa and the military. Morgan Tsvangirai would have won both elections. And so it is ironic that they are now the people removing him and claiming to be the saviors of the nation. What is also ironic, of course, is that it is ZANU-PF which has brought Zimbabwe to her knees. I mentioned Patrick Chinamasa. He's been the finance minister during the last few years and has literally reduced the country to its knees. During the time of the inclusive government between 2009 and 2013, the economy grew, bank deposits grew, there was stability under Tendai Biti, the then finance minister. So in conclusion on this segment, we don't believe that they have the ability to run the country. They may be different actors to Robert Mugabe, but they've been complicit. They've been part of the problem.
So what are the options now for the party, especially for the people here in this case?
Well, there are very limited options because ZANU-PF, because of the way the 2013 election went, dominates parliament. There's 270 seats in the lower house and ZANU-PF has 215. So they don't need the MDC opposition to govern. The MDC has always been committed to the rule of law, to a policy of non-violence, and we've spoken out. As much as we are grateful for what the military have done to remove Robert Mugabe, their actions remain illegal. This is a coup. Our constitution, section 213 of our constitution, says that troops are not to be deployed in Zimbabwe without the authority of the president. And it is clear that they've acted without the authority of the president. So this is illegal, but we are powerless to confront the military, and even in parliament, we have a minority. So all that we can do is say that the constitution should be respected, the rule of law should be respected, and see what is the outcome of this impeachment process. But let me make one final point. And let's assume that this happens, when Mnangagwa takes over as president, he has enormous problems to overcome. The country's economy is close to collapse. The budget deficit is growing. Debt has rocketed. And he cannot really resolve those problems unless he can get buy-in from the opposition and from the international community.
Right,
so he needs us.
All right, let me quickly come to you now, Clem. From what David said, Mnangagwa has a lot of challenges ahead of him, but still, the question is, do you think the opposition has a chance in government, knowing that the ZANU-PF, according to what he said, brought Zimbabwe to its knees and it is perceived now as the savior of the country?
That's the sad part of it, because they share a lot of responsibility for the parlous state in which Zimbabwe has found itself. Because it's interesting that the youth group that only recently was making a lot of noise about Mrs. Grace Mugabe is one of those groups that have now turned around and said, no, she should be expelled, and so on and so forth. So African leaders should be watching. You know, when people are saying Hosanna, Hosanna, remember that crucify him is coming a couple of days later. But that's by the way. The important point really is this, that I think that if Zimbabwe is to move forward, the ZANU-PF should not think that they can go it alone. They ought to work with the MDC. The MDC is also split, the two of them, because they have some very competent hands there. Bring them on board, and at least until the next general election. So
you're proposing a unity government here?
Yes, bring them on board until the next general election, and then there can be free and fair election. Morgan Shangira has suggested that the next election should be conducted by, by an international body, maybe not left to the hands of Zimbabweans. Maybe that will work.
But is that absolutely necessary? Because the country definitely can't stand on its own without having to call the international community.
Yeah, the country can stand on its own. But the thing is that, remember that the reputation of Emmerson Mnangagwa is not superior to the reputation of his master, who dicked him only recently. So, I mean, both of them are seen to be very hardline people, and he particularly is seen as the arrowhead and the battering ram that Robert Mugabe had used over the years, particularly with against those areas of Zimbabwe that were not very pliant in the 80s against Ndebele, properly. I mean, it is rumored that over 20,000 people were killed. Now, you can say that bygones should be bygones, but when 20,000 people have died, somehow or the other, there ought to be a time of reckoning. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but a time of reckoning ought to come. In any case, the Zimbabwean people are saying loud and clear, Papa, your time of reckoning has come.
And talking about who takes over Zimbabwe's leadership, who do you have in mind among the contenders, or not perceived contenders now, for the top job? Who do you think would be the right person to take the country to the next, to the promised land, if I were to put it that way?
Well, I think I would be deceiving myself even if I started trying to mention names. But what I do know is that, I mean, it is possible because Mnangagwa he's good in some aspects. He has some reformist tendencies when he gets to the economy, but he's seen as somebody with a brutal past and possibly a not less brutal present. But hoping that in the future he would be able to. He has what it takes because he has the loyalty of the security arm of the nation, the military and the intelligence arm, and he needs to work very hard to convince people that he is really the person. We wish Zimbabweans good luck.
All right, that's true. David, what can you add to what I just asked Klembaye in terms of who would be the likely leader for Zimbabwe?
Well, you're allowing me to dream a bit this evening. Let me just try to give an objective assessment.
Right.
The problem that people have regarding Emmerson Mnangagwa is that, as has just been said, he was the arrowhead. Robert Mugabe has used him in the last 30 years to achieve his political purposes. So Emmerson Mnangagwa was at the forefront of the attack on Joshua Nkomo and the ZAPU party in the 1980s and the genocide which occurred in the southwest of the country then. He was Minister of State Security then and engaged in horrendous acts. He also was the arrowhead in 2008. In the March election of 2008, which Mugabe almost lost, Mnangagwa was not part of that. He had been demoted by Mugabe, but Mugabe brought him in for the runoff election, and it was Mnangagwa who worked very closely with the military to crush Morgan Tsvangirai, to target MDC youth in particular. Youths were abducted and assassinated, and so that is his history. And we've said, objective people have said, that whilst we recognize that he is quite competent when it comes to business and the administration of the country, he needs to draw a line in the sand regarding his past.
Right.
And assure Zimbabweans that he's committed to the rule of law, committed to the Constitution, to respecting the Constitution.
All
but
right.
if he doesn't do that, Zimbabweans aren't going to have faith in him. Do you want me to go on and give you some other...
Well, actually, we would have loved to extend it further, but I think you've made your points clearly loud as well. I'd like to thank you very much indeed at this time. David Coltart, lawyer, founding member of the Movement for Democratic Change, and also a former minister under President Mugabe. Thank you very much. And as well, I'd like to thank Claire Mbaye here with me in the studio, a media consultant and political analyst. Would like to thank you very much indeed for your contributions on Africa Today.
Thank you.
Now, these are really interesting times in Africa, with a growing list of dictators long gone and at least one more to go, showing that no tyrant is above the law and no dictator is beyond reach. Having witnessed the decline of Grace Mugabe, Zimbabweans remain on the edge, anxiously waiting for the fall of Mugabe from grace, with the world checking out of his kind elsewhere in Africa and asking for who's next. Well, that is our package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Makwariola, and always remember, change starts with you.